Hi, and thanks for watching this message video. Today we're continuing on in our series called Healthy Living, where we're looking at what the Bible really says about different subjects associated with our spiritual health versus our physical health. And today we're talking about the subjects of peopling and hygiene, or more specifically, social distancing and wearing masks. Now, I have friends that live all throughout the world, and every single one of them have been impacted by COVID-19. Or in other words, all of them have had to be thinking about peopling and hygiene. For instance, peopling who they're around or whether or not those people are susceptible to COVID more so than maybe others. Or hygiene, lots of washing of hands or the wearing of a mask in public places. And for a lot of people, they've struggled with these things, but for different reasons. Some have struggled because they feel like their freedoms have been taken away, or now they're forced to do something that they don't think is necessary. Whereas others have struggled because they've seen what COVID can do, and therefore they've chosen to quarantine themselves from those that they love. And others have chosen to get into PPE, or personal protection equipment, because they believed that it mattered. Now, for those who are aware of the number one command that's ever been given by God, you're probably aware of what God's heart is when it comes to things like peopling and hygiene. But for those who are not aware of that command, take a look at what it is that Jesus said when a religious expert in his day asked him, "Hey, of all the commands, which is the most important?" Mark 12:29. Jesus replied, "The most important commandment is this. Listen, O Israel, the Lord our God is the one and only God. And you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, and all your strength. The second is equally important. Love your neighbor as yourself. No other commandment is greater than these." If you didn't pick up on it, the biggest deal that there is that we would show love. Which means when it comes to peopling and hygiene, the thing that we need to be thinking about is what is the most loving thing that we can do. Now, for a lot of people, when it comes to peopling and hygiene, a way to think about it is similar to the way we're supposed to be thinking about our dietary freedoms, in that we have been given the freedom to do whatever it is that we want to in our own homes or in our own businesses. However, when it comes to others, we are always told to be careful that we're not causing anybody else to stumble, or we're careful not to offend anybody around us when it comes to their opinion of dietary rules or restrictions or freedoms. And it's the same way with peopling and hygiene, in that there are times when you and I need to understand that God might be giving us freedoms, but that he also might be asking for us to temporarily give them up, because somebody else around us might be offended by what it is that we're doing, and we don't want to do that. Which leads us to reminder number one for today, which is never demand personal freedoms. Meaning, even though we have been given personal dietary freedoms, as well as God allows for us to have our own personal opinions about things like masks, when it comes right down to it, he wants us to be sensitive to others and not to offend others with our own personal freedoms, and if necessary, give them up for a period of time for the benefit of others. And remember, if you consider yourself to be mature, then you are one of those people that God expects to be intentionally peopling and intentionally giving up your freedoms. So don't give up on people in frustration or disgust. In fact, a couple of weeks ago, one of Solomon's principles was mentioned, and that two people coupled together are better than one, and even better are three. And this is a truth that's not just good in terms of a physical sense and mental sense, but also in a spiritual sense. Because the truth of it is the only way that our heart can grow, which is the most important thing to Jesus, is through peopling. In fact, take a look at what we're told. Hebrews 3:12. Be careful then, dear brothers and sisters. Make sure that your own hearts are not evil and unbelieving, turning you away from the living God. You must warn each other every day while it is still today, so that none of you will be deceived by sin and hardened against God. As you can see, the emphasis given here was that you and I are to pay attention to the health of our own heart, as well as to be open to the daily encouragement that comes from others to keep our heart strong, as well as to be engaging in the encouragement of others on a daily basis to keep their heart strong. And why? And it's because sin is so present. It's so constantly there and quickly can drag us down. And this is the reason why we are supposed to be so careful, which can mean a lot of things, including being sensitive or careful to those who are still reacting to a pandemic. So therefore, God wants us to pay very close attention to hygiene, which brings us to reminder number 2 for today, which is we must be sensitive to others, or careful with the way that other people feel about hygiene and therefore interact with them. For instance, with some people, once we figure out the way that they feel about it, it might be better to interact with them or engage with them through a text message or a phone call or through email. Some others, it might be still okay to get together with them in person. The point is that we have to be sensitive to others and try to operate as best as we can with them to stay in some form of encouragement. But at times, it will actually be necessary for us also to help them get back on track. For instance, look what we're told. Galatians 6:1. Dear brothers and sisters, if another believer is overcome by some sin, you who are godly should gently and humbly help that person back onto the right path. And be careful not to fall into the same temptation yourself. Share each other's burdens, and in this way obey the law of Christ. If you think you are too important to help somebody, you're only fooling yourself. You're not that important. It is impossible to encourage somebody or to redirect somebody back onto the right path unless we are somehow, some way peopling with them, whether in person or not. So we have to be careful about the way that other people feel about hygiene and then continue to stay connected. Now, speaking of hygiene, one of the other ways that we can be conscientious or careful or loving with others when it comes to hygiene is this. Reminder number 3, pay attention to our own personal hygiene. And by that I mean both physically and spiritually. For instance, earlier on, the writer of Hebrews mentioned that we're supposed to look after our own heart as well as the hearts of others. And who could forget when Jesus said, pay attention to the log in your own eye so that you can help somebody with the speck in their eye. So in other words, there's always been this emphasis that we have to pay attention to our own physical/spiritual health as well as be attentive to the physical or spiritual health of others, specifically that spiritual health, which means you and I are never going to be able to notice or maybe help somebody else clean up filth in their life physically or spiritually if you and I are embracing filth physically and spiritually in our own lives. So therefore, we need to be able to stay somehow, some way clean. Let me be blunt. We need to keep ourselves both physically and spiritually clean for the benefit or sensitivity to others. For instance, in the book of Leviticus, we have been told, primarily in the chapters of 11 and 15, that there are a variety of commands associated with things like hand washing, or bathing, or grooming, or washing our clothes. And why? Because all of these things reduce the transmission of disease. Or in other words, all of these commands were given to reinforce proper hygiene. To further reinforce the importance of hygiene, all alumni from Guatemala know that Dr. Tito, who was the head doctor of La Misión, our partner organization there in Guatemala, he instructs everybody who comes, including the people who are a part of the Guatemalan team, that they need to shower twice a day, every single day while we're there. And the reason for it is a lot, or the vast majority of people in the Guatemalan villages practice poor hygiene, and therefore they suffer from a variety of intestinal and skin diseases that can easily be passed along to us just simply through touch. So when we're showering twice a day, we're not only helping to reduce the amount of impact that some of those diseases might have on us, we're reducing the risk of transmitting that kind of a disease to somebody else. And so we have to be careful. Now, are there some people who take hygiene and their level of care too far? Or in other words, they become so wrapped up in hygiene that they're no longer capable of peopling in a proper way, or they do so in such a way that they're offensive? Yes, that happens all the time. In fact, in Jesus' day, that is exactly what was going on with the religious experts. Mark 7:1. One day, some Pharisees and teachers of religious law arrived from Jerusalem to see Jesus. They noticed that some of his disciples failed to follow the Jewish ritual of hand washing before eating. The Jews, especially the Pharisees, do not eat until they have poured water over their cupped hands, as required by their ancient traditions. Similarly, they don't eat anything from the market until they immerse their hands in water. This is but one of many traditions they have clung to, such as their ceremonial washing of cups, pitchers, and kettles. So the Pharisees and teachers of religious law asked him, "Why don't your disciples follow our age-old tradition? They eat without first performing the hand-washing ceremony." Jesus replied, "You hypocrites! Isaiah was right when he prophesied about you, for he wrote, 'These people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. Their worship is a farce, for they teach man-made ideas as commands from God. For you ignore God's law and substitute your own tradition.'" I mentioned earlier that these religious experts understood what God's law demanded, that they love, but they weren't loving. And in their delusion of self-righteousness, they not only criticized Jesus and his disciples for their hygiene, but also even for their dietary choices, which is easy to do for any of us when we don't remember reminder number 1, to never demand our own personal freedoms. Or reminder number 2, that we need to be sensitive to others. Or reminder number 3, that we're only supposed to really pay attention to our own personal hygiene before we start digging into the personal hygiene of others. Which ultimately is a whole lot easier to do when you and I are putting our focus on God. So, what have we learned here today? Well, what we've basically learned is this, is that when it comes to peopling and hygiene, what God wants us to do is to be loving or to be kind or to be sensitive to others and to pay attention to what it is that they're thinking, and if necessary, give up our own personal freedoms in order to be able to put them at ease. And that is a whole lot easier to do, again, when you and I are attempting to become more and more and more like Christ or like God, which when we do that, will obviously make us attractive in every possible way. Ephesians 5:1, "Imitate God, therefore, in everything you do, because you are his dear children. Live a life filled with love, following the example of Christ. He loved us and offered himself as a sacrifice for us, a pleasing aroma to God. So be careful how you live. Don't live like fools, but like those who are wise. Make the most of every opportunity in these evil days. Don't act thoughtlessly, but understand what the Lord wants you to do."